Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to our panelists. We're coming to our second day of conference. Had great dialogues, great moments, and a very important topic that united us is the Brazilian law, the governance and the regulation on the Brazilian carbon market. I talked to Cristina, Aloísio, and Plínio. We are bringing this governmental view and the action on the federal government on regulating the SBCE and bringing Plínio as well this look of the market, the private sector. And first of all, thank you, Cristina, Aloísio, and Plínio. So we can explore which are the challenges we have in the country now to implement and strengthen this Brazilian market of Brazilian carbon credits. After such a weighted law, have the regulation now, I would like to make an open question to hear from the Minister of Finance and Environmental Ministry what are the next steps. We know already the plan for implementation of the SBCE. What this plan brings, how the governance, climate governance is going to be established in the federal level, what's the guarantee of participation of different sectors on this governance from the point of view of having some plurality on the process of regulation of SBCE. Good afternoon. Thank you, Julie, for your question. I would like to salute Plínio and Aloísio. It's a pleasure being in this conference here today. Before I answer, please let me say something. I will not do any public talk without defending peace. We see around the world is not acceptable, and we all should demonstrate that we do not agree that so many lives are lost through war. That's the first point. I am under the weather. My voice is a little bit funky. When we talk about the regulation of the law 1542, the Article 50 brings a timeline that years for the regulation, first and second year, government has to build the governance to start implementing those more urgent measures related to building our carbon market and what connects to the offering of the voluntary market of carbon credits. What we did in the task force on the Brazilian system of commerce of emissions, that is at SIM, the Interministerial Committee of Climate Change, led by Aloísio and Ana Paula Machado on MMA, Minister of Agriculture, and me, Marcelo Neves, and Finance Ministry, is to build this roadmap for implementation, this action plan. In this moment, we have 100 pages in this regulation book, done with this technical support from World Bank, with some consultation through Delphi. Experts, Brazilian experts that helped us looking at all those themes and topics at the law to program which are the steps for implementation of this program. Many of you here, I was able to see in the foyer outside, and I was able to talk to you, and you know. When we published this law in December last year, we published the law, and we published an executive summary that put those implementation phases clear, and now with a full report. This full report is going to come with the announcement from the Extraordinary Secretaries for Carbon Market. That's going to be the organ that's going to manage the market, to take care of this the first steps of this implementation, while we wait for this decision of the regulating agents for carbon market. Now I would like to go to Ministry of Environment, how this governance on the implementation of SBCE is going to be worked out. When we look at the procedures at the federal level, how we're going to implement that? We're still regulating, putting together the legal framework, how Ministry of Agriculture is working these issues. Thank you, Julie, for your question. Good afternoon, everybody. And my colleague panelists, thank you for the invitation. And here, I give here my compliments for our executive secretary. We are dividing ourselves here on a very intense agenda, as you all may know. MMA, as Cristina said, we are part of this work, coordinating these efforts. In this process, they start on the elaboration of the project, design of the project, and now implementing and regulation of the SBCE. I'd like to show now some specific areas and competencies on the Ministry of Environment for the broader process on the SBCE that are connected directly through other parts. First of all, the law 15442 brought new competencies for CONRAD and new instruments that we didn't have before. And now they are under our responsibility. That includes this framework for the RED Plus programs, the exclusion of areas for the exclusion of some jurisdictional program, having this territorial framework as well. So this process can follow, have transparency, bringing safety, judicial safety for the process, and needed by law. These are new competencies, and connect to that, we see necessary, and we need to exercise from our technical capacity at CONRAD to perform the functions for RED Plus on the Climate Convention, on this technical expertise. As we see integrity on the national results on RED Plus. How do we distribute those resources, and what is look at the integrity and environmental quality of those assets. This is a block of competencies where we have to reorganize the structure of the environment ministry. We have to connect some areas, to have some focal points for those attributions. So we're going to take care of that and put this together, connect to our secretary. A second competent area of expertise connected to this agenda is the MMA, is the national authority for the Accord 6 for Paris Agreement. These are the three mechanisms for the market. 6.2, there's a cooperative approach in between countries among frameworks for carbon market, and 6.4, the subsidy old MDA that regulates the credit on this convention. And the third point is that MMA has the attribution to be the executive secretariat of the Interministerial Committee for Climate Change, and having more decision power on climate politics in Brazil about the NDCs. Is going to be responsible for the SBCE that's going to be approved on the plan for allocation, going to define the goals of some regulated sectors, who is going to be the decision-making point, or how we engage on 6.2, and how can we commercialize, how is the quantity, and under which rules we can commercialize those credits. We have to prepare this field for those aspects, and also other issues connected to the market, how they connect to this agenda, some specific competencies we have with the Environment Ministry.
Thank you. Now, Plinio, I invite you to give a perspective on the private sector concerning the regulation. Since the law has been approved in all the processes we have, so what is going to be the behavior of the market in terms of offer and demand? And when we talk about carbon credit market, I would like to explore with you how is this carbon market in according to your experience. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being present today. It was a hard work to put together this event in Aliança, but seeing all of you guys here in this panel, we know that we are going into the right direction. There is an English saying that say if you're not in the table, you are in the menu, but now we are actually sitting in the same table, and part of the collective efforts made this happen. Thank you, and I would like to congratulate Julie on behalf of Aliança for this amazing work. We have been discussing this since 2019, and we've talked actually 2009. From 2009 to 2024, we had frustrations. It took a long time. We know it's been a long time, but now we have the law. Right now, it's time to celebrate. We supported the government on that, and we have, as a coalition, an understanding that it is a good law. It's not perfect, of course, but it's a good one. And now we need to understand how the implementation will take place. Let's talk about expectations. As a market, we need to understand, and also there are other environmental standards and forest code. We see that they could take to lead to the implementation. These are the examples in this sector. But of course, we cannot have the expectation that after having the law, everything is okay and that's okay. Everything gonna work. We need to avoid that as a society, and the private sector should be involved into that too. The second mess that happens is the carbon credit market and the regulated carbon market. In some versions of the wording in the text, we it's not clear about the offsets in the system, but the carbon market, the main goal is not to create demand for the project developers. This is not the main goal, I say, okay, for the law. Because here we have this kind of audience, and we know that people call us and say, "Wow, I have a farm now. I want to sell carbon," but because the law is there. But we have to tell them that this is not how it is. We have to match to the expectations. We need to align the expectations. So we don't want this to happen. Let's talk about what is interesting in this law for us to continue with the protagonism. First, I'm going to divide offer and demand. Let's talk about the offer. The offer will happen through allowance or the credit approved by the governance and the methodologies. From the offer perspective, we have an accumulated experience in Brazil of good and bad projects. But the most important one is that we have an accumulated experience of 20 years of projects in nature-based solutions. Many of the markets that we considered abroad, they didn't have that when the law was enacted, but it was recognized in the possibility of bringing the credits to the system. We cannot have the expectation that everything will turn into carbon credit. We cannot have this kind of expectations. We need to be careful, not only in the red, but also in the ALM and all the acronyms we use in the market, ARR. We heard so many things. Some people say that they are going to start generating carbon credits with the activities they have been conducting all their lives. Let's be careful with that, and also we need to defer what is going to happen, and also we don't have to be in a rush. This is one of the points of the offer. But the voluntary market, under the leadership of Aliança and other collectives, they said that we should have the possibility of offsetting in the Brazilian regulated market. This is not an exclusion, but we are talking about the nature credits, and this is the spirit of the conference. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more further on the nature based. We have the tech based panel and great panels about that, but we can mitigate emissions. Now I'm going to talk about demand. This is the most important factor. There is no demand if two things happen separately or together, which is worth. If the cap is high, we don't have demand. If the cap is thought without a breakthrough of technology, there is no demand, zero demand. Another thing, if the number of allowances distributed and allocated freely, which are the international models, I guess you already um, talking about that, and probably you don't have an answer for that because we need more clear curves. But if we have over allowance and an excessive offer of license, it's a license for pollution. A company emits carbon and they receive a license. When the government, in some cases, will freely allocate to them, in thesis, they don't need to change the behavior. So two things, high cap and over allowance, isolated or together, which is worse. So then this way we will not have good demand or good pricing for the demand. For those who work in the voluntary market their whole lives, it's even better to keep working on the voluntary market because the demand of the voluntary market, we saw panels talking about the ups and downs, but we see now a comeback of the demand. This is very simple to explain. We have been through 2 years with the reduction of the offer supply, mostly because of lack of integrity. This was not a solid system because we had a lot of frauds. But we fixed so many things. Yesterday we had an amazing panel from the federal police, and we thought that like in Brazil we only have fraudsters and stuff like that. But we in Brazil we are the most modern country in terms of remote control, remote monitoring, all that in the edge, in the territory, fighting against illegality. We are not land grabbers. We are not timber grabbers. We are actually here working for the cause of restoration. And the governance, to answer to your question, the governance has the capacity to shield that, to put, and we can protect that in the lobbies, in the conferences. And this is the third one, we have the impression that everybody is going to make money out of the carbon credit, but this is crazy to think about. It took a long time because a lobby doesn't want to reduce emissions because buying the carbon credits is a cost. We need to include that in the production model to issue that in a different way. Now the lobby will start. Now the regulated sectors, it's not us, but they will go to Brasilia to seek for that. It's natural. We cannot pretend this is not going to happen. It happened everywhere in the world. We need time enough to have the governance built in a way that is protected, because or we'll have a high cap or a high allowance, and it's not gonna make anything work here. We're not gonna make it work if this happens. And lastly, I know this is not a provocation because Chris already said that, but this is an opinion that we are still working on in Aliança. But we'll need a regulatory agency. There is no way with the size of this market, and I printed the eighth article of the law. If you see the attributions on that, whether an interministerial board or a department, secretariat, whatever it is, the organization under eighth article, which is creating bids and allocating and reproving, well, the target from the sector will be very, very high. Everybody will want to have a share on that. It's not going to be like this, okay? The first restriction. What I understand here is that we are forming a consensus in the private sector that if we don't have a regulatory agency, we'll have a carbon market that will be harmful for the initiatives that are already ongoing, and we don't want that. And lastly, it's about the rush. Of course, we really want to have COP to be over, and we are in a rush because of COP. And COP and the regulation is totally different. They are totally different. We can expect a regulation because of this Russian copy, and it's even hard for the public sector to build something. But to deconstruct, to build again, it's even more difficult. So the law has been just passed, and we are not delayed, guys. We are not delayed yet. We need to be careful. It's essential to have the decarbonization to have a mechanism like that. Thank you, Plinio. Now that I hear you, I understand that this agenda comes from a regulatory environment and it goes through a market perspective because everything that was regulated create some impact in the market. Also, we have the targets that will be attributed for the decarbonization process. And we should be really, really careful. We need to hear the sector that will be regulated so that this agenda doesn't go to the opposite side, that it actually contributes. And considering the Paris Agreement, we don't want to have a bigger problem. I'm going to pick back on Plinio's comment about the regulatory agency because I know there is an understanding, at least most of the developers or representatives in banks and ratings agencies that I've been talking to, they need to understand that the regulatory environment in the country, it's not just a definition by decree, but what is actually going to be implemented based on the law and all the points that Plinio mentioned. How is this going to be regulated? What is going to be the environment that will handle everything that is needed? Now we know that a regulatory agency, if they were present, they could answer to the attributions defined in the law. I would like to hear from you how the Department of Economy is considering this topic. In the technical group SBCE, there was a possibility of the regulated market to the managing body, especially in compliance with Law 1422. If we compare to other countries and other jurisdictions, the managing bodies related to the carbon credit market and the other themes, they vary in formats. Some countries they have regulatory agencies, some others they are part of a department in the ministries or in the government, maybe in the Ministry of Energy or other ministries. It's not a rule, but for each case, the regulatory environment is the most important part in the institutional system of the country. We understand that for Brazil, and considering the high technical complexity and the need of autonomy, and like Plinio said, to avoid the lobby, we understand that the regulatory agency is the best format, but it's more expensive, more complex. It demands uh, an exam, a lot of things, and it takes a long time. We need to pass bills, we need approval from the Congress, and the technical group defends the regulatory agency, and we are working on understanding what is going to be best for these regulatory agencies. But considering the law, and of course I agree, we're not going to accelerate because the stakes are already high for the difficulty of implementation. But considering the calendar, we need to have another managing body, maybe a temporary one, a temporary department that will tackle the first steps of that. And we're talking about the first steps. So first, the analysis of regulatory impact. We need the studies, the monitoring reports, definition of sector coverage, installations, activities by sector, inspectionary or not. We need to have the central registry of the Brazilian system of emissions and developing all the models, all the templates, everything to have the reports on that, having the sector prepared to cope with this report, understanding how the MRV will be. And in this process, engagement and communication with the stakeholders. For COP, we want to have an initial draft, a starting point, because there is a lot of expectation in terms of regulation. We have different carbon markets. We need to understand the offer, the demand for each one of them to guarantee that the price is balanced, is a price that reflects the carbon credit that has quality in each environment. So we need to dialogue a lot.
Sorry, we need to learn from our experience or from the developers on MDE, MDL, the voluntary market. They have already a long experience, so we can get the contribution from all parts. This engagement is fundamental in this process of implementation on the first year, where the secretary is going to be responsible for. And we have also everything that is related with the designated Brazilian authority, CONRAD, as well, with the accreditation of the methodologies that are going to be used for those certifications. And this is very complex. And when we have the national plan for location and the bids, we should have a very robust agency to take care of that, bring safety for the process, judicial and operational safety. And we have the penalties, sanctions. That's already super complex to do this defense. While so, we are working both fronts to plan this agency and put the secretary to work. Thank you. Now, Aloísio, I would like to hear a little bit from you. In your initial speech, you brought that this is the attribution of the environmental ministry to the technical review and the technical cooperation connected to the Article 6. Where Brazil go when we talk about those aspects? The Minister of Environment, we have just have COP around the corner. COP is the whole year, it's full year. We have negotiations the whole year. So when we finish the COP, we start the next negotiation for the next COP, the implementation, the rule book, how Brazil is unifying what I will bring to the COP related to Article 6. Thank you, Julie. This is a very important issue that open new perspectives. And you have to understand other specific markets for carbon market and environmental assets based on reductions. Article 6 summarized foresee market platform where a country cannot reach your NDC, not bringing all the efforts and it's above its NDC, they can buy environmental results from other countries, mitigation results that went over their NDC and did even more than their NDC. Established that we can do these bilateral agreements from in between countries to sell mitigation results to each other. Last year on COP29, we approved the rule book that defines how this mechanism is going to operate and all the missing details that we need to make this possible. and also the transparency systems. All the countries that do that, they have to report, uh, build reports, and show what kind of agreements they are building, what's behind those agreements, and what they did on transferring mitigation results from one country to the other. Those who sold credits, they have to add um, that on the accountancy of credits, and those who bought, they have also to be transparent about these bought credits. What we are doing under this aspect, uh, work that's done under this technical group, this task force, including many ministries for carbon market. The first step is to create a group of rules to say how this is going to work in Brazil. How do we know if we have emission results for behind or ahead that we can establish or understand and deal with different countries having results, how we distribute and allocate them, who can use those results. We need to organize that for us to not go inside this mechanism, not understand how it works with clear criteria, very objective criteria, avoiding selling for the highest bidder, and a group of procedures that generate the biggest benefits for the country. So this can be strategic and can contribute to the goals of the country on mitigation. That's a work done internally to build this rule book, and before doing the resolution of those points, we have to open a process for dialogue. We're working this way, we're building this criteria, we want to use this criteria. We need inputs, we need suppliers, and then we can build this rule book. With that, we can understand how and when we can operate this mechanism in this market. We need this base condition. We need to be on the right path on our NDC. We need to know that we're going to go over and beyond our NDC to assume the commitment to be able to sell those results to a partner, a different country. We have to build this framework. We need to understand how we do it and how strategic this can be for our country. Another point about the Article 6 is 6.4, the one that substitutes the older NDL. There's the short term for the transition for the projects already in the field, in need and want to transition for the new mechanism for validation that we have to build till the end of the year. But the main attribution we can have on this new mechanism is to approve the projects, approve the new projects that were being proposed on these new mechanisms. But the most important aspect is to talk about the methodologies inside this new mechanism. And this is a discussion that's very necessary for our culture. That's a very complex decision. And a very specific example is credit about remotion. We are discussing it. We are part of this debate. We want to guarantee that this new mechanism 6.4 can guarantee also robust tools for us to operate and can implement solid projects in Brazil that can be recognized worldly. That's why it's important to use a mechanism approved internationally, approved by UN, a great reference for quality and credibility, integrity on credits. We have this step-by-step agenda on credits. It is going to be very useful to Brazil. Thank you, Aloísio. It's a very important matter, and we need to understand. It's not easy to understand, even more when we go to this cooperative environment among countries, and we go to the rule book in each country and have to look at the implementation book in each country. How can we understand how the Article 6 is going to work among those countries, those nations, So to hear a little bit from your experience and how the Brazilian government is treating that is very important and interesting. We see other countries on bilateral relations like Singapore establishing agreements with us. We see Brazil moving forward in this agenda. Plinio, I would like to hear from you. What is your analysis, market analysis, on what is necessary to bring more integrity to our projects so we can strengthen even more this agenda? I believe we are in this innovation environment, and when we look at nature-based solutions, we can connect that to RRR and these other agendas. Red getting some speed in Brazil as well, making it look like everything after the law generates some instability. I would like to hear from you. How do you see that? What can bring more integrity to our market and connecting Cristina and Aloísio? And from the government side, what can strengthen the international look for those who buy those credits so we can strengthen this agenda even more? And on forestal carbon. Thank you. I'm going to start from red. On the previous panel, they brought a very interesting data comparing the categories on management in Amazonia and the performance in deforestation. I see some projects in red. I never saw any graphic. This is so much more effective even than Brazilian native territories, indigenous territories. Even in the indigenous territories, they lost forests. And this shows how strong these policies can be. We have to be aware of that. And RED is one of these mechanisms. It is one of the single mechanisms that can help and give access to the private sector on these policies. And we have to say that. It's important to say. If we go to extreme of integrity, I'm going to talk about the extremities. On the maximum integrity, we can have a load of projects that are like landfills, which is important to do waste management. Waste is 6% of the emissions. Our company is the biggest company on waste management in Brazil, residue management, and residue is important, but it's not the most important aspect. Our most important point, even with restoration, the most important aspect is the reduction of deforestation. And I knew it, but today with Dean Epps and other colleagues and Carlos Nobre, what we can see is that we are very close. Maybe next year in Amazonia, we can have the second finger of red. We can have more. It can be the biggest source of emissions because of the forest fires that are hurting our country. Where is harder? Where we have more emissions, it's harder to have integrity. The emissions, in its biggest part, the Secretary Maura made a very important distinction in between legal deforestation and illegal deforestation. We're working on judicial way, territorial, and our indigenous colleague talk about it, about roads. Thank you for bringing this aspect to us. We are in war with the planet a long time already. Hearing those indigenous songs, I don't want to go far away to trip on that, but we have to be careful when we talk about integrity, because as a country, we were not able, as a society, the society, were not able yet to define how we want to allocate our quantity assets on RED. We didn't talk about stock and flow. We have the jurisdictional, we have the projects. We were not able to talk about the mathematics. The integrity and the history is bring history in Portuguese as well, syntax. So when we talk about integrity, and when we talk about liquidity, marketing, rating, and commodities, it's a broad band of aspects. The best way to find integrity is through legislation, command and control. I'm going to repeat here again. The possibility to have a program from the size of Brazil Plus with the technology that Brazil Plus can bring on those alerts and technologies, improving the size of the technology for projects for nature-based assets. Look what this integrity is going to come from the market and as a series of activities that is not going to be the starting point. We're going to be spend 10 years more talking about integrity, going to get nowhere. For integrity for the buyer, the buyer, credit buyer is the person that has the cost in the beginning, and who has a cost is going. If you sold something at the time, the buyer try to pay the least for your product. They want to. That's about business. They want to pay as least as possible for your product. So we have to be careful when we put integrity. We talk a lot about integrity. Can be a stone can stop this development. It's not about not having integrity. Integrity is going to come with the use of technology, the improvement of the legal framework, the attribution of specific institutions on ministries that has more command and control. Eventually, Minister of Finance to certificate those activities. That's about it. In the private sector, and now I make this connection with the restoration. And restoration, in the end, everything can become forest. Every restoration can become a RED program in 10 years. Some people don't like RED and like restoration. Everything working well, you have a huge project of RED in 10 years. Restoration has a distinction because the state has a very strong limitation for that to allocate capital. It's very expensive.
So who here had stopped using PowerPoint and using others? You know, it's expensive. It creates a natural barrier. And of course, those allocating capital, this volume, we're talking about 30 to 90,000 reais per hectare. This is 6 times more expensive than any culture. So those allocating this capital will surely do a due diligence in terms of land tenure matters. In previous panels, we talked about the importance of BNDES. And for those who borrowed money from BNDES Bank, you know, to be able to access the resource, you have so many diligence, so many approvals that will guarantee integrity. We need to know that we have mechanisms in place, but how we are going to use that, we need to think about that. It's an international and competitive environment, and we need to use that with the buyers and those interested in cheap insures. If it's only to sell, we need to do the homework because there are so many questions we have with the rule book. The technical rule book has been approved, but the politics one hasn't. We have a multilateral politics that is really, really bad right now. I think Brazil is going to be a protagonism again. We are together on that. We are working together. Aliança is there, defending democracy, defending the environment, the multilateral environment. And of course, we need to have the shock of reality to understand how things are complex and how they take longer to happen. We already have the ratings, we already have the buyers that are more and more sophisticated to differentiate what is supposed to be differentiated. So we have good conditions for that. Yeah, we have different fronts on that when we talk about the projects. We have a big reference of projects that are implemented with integrity. The law provides a legal environment in which the private sector will develop the projects with more safety. I understand, yeah, and I agree with you that somehow we are still making mistakes. We still have deforestation. We still have areas that historically are there in the deforestation curve, and we need to have a trend of reduction. And RED is here to foster the efforts to reduce deforestation. We always use the Amazon as a reference, and we have other biomes, but specifically the Amazon covers the economic and social development. The additionality aspect that the carbon projects provide are fundamental. It's not only reducing deforestation, but promoting economic and social development in the territories where the projects are implemented. For all that, we need a volume of resources. We talk about climate funding, and it's always hard to do the math on that. And we need to understand the dynamic of that. Cristina, I would like to hear from you the Article 56 of the law that covers the insurer's role and the risk the risk percentage of the insurers, and how can we move the market to have a participation of them. And I would like to know your perspective and how this situation is right now. Well, Article 56 requires that a percentage of the technical reserves of insurers and pension plan companies are applied to carbon credits or investment funds related to environmental assets. In subparagraph 7 talks about carbon credit. The technical reserves, they total 1.8 trillion reais, which would be 8 billion. The law was enacted at the moment of the signature, but we need to understand that this article specifically is not self-applicable, and it demands its own regulation to create proper conditions to have the offer matching with the demand in a way that the offers and the offer and demand forces are not unbalanced. So we have projects and programs that could meet this demand. The article is judicialized by the federal court. But regardless of that, the executive branch has to approve the law in the Congress. We are getting ready for the regulation into the insurance market. We have the resolution 4493 that defines the use of the reserve. The carbon credits are included. But of course, we needed a definition of what it means, right? The carbon credit. And the regulation provides safety for offer and demand. We need to understand the legal feasibility for this implementation to be gradual. It's not going to be 100% met in December 2025, the implementation. So we need to think about a gradual implementation in order to have the market, and you are operating in the private sector. We want you to create the projects and develop the projects to meet this demand. But the law establishes different approaches for markets, the jurisdictional projects, the concession of public forests that can have a group of alternatives for a basket that will form the offer relevant for the demand. The Department of Finance understands that at this moment it will allow growth of the projects and the programs. The challenge is that they should have integrity and permeate all the system of the carbon, for example, certification, verification. There are so many challenges for the implementation in a way that the article will work in a solid way to provide great opportunities for the market. And in the regulated market, the players are self-organized, that they organize, and this will happen according to the law in the next 5 years. Along the next 5 years, the implementation of Article 56 is provides a significant development of projects. We'll have demand of projects, and we hope that this will promote the mitigation in the country. Well, this is a way of encouraging the regulated sectors to mitigate their emissions, right? Now I'll go back to Aloísio to talk about the exclusion of areas. How are you working with that in the ministry? And I would like to then have the questions from the audience, but I would like to know specifically about the safeguards. Thank you, Julie. The two instruments that the law um, brought is about the exclusion of the areas and the programs related to it. For the fact that the law included that, it's because there is an actual demand already. But we understand that there is a work to be done, especially in CONARED and the Department of Deforestation Control. They are promoting the demand, but we need to actually transform that into a system, an informatized system that will allow to assess the territories of exclusion of areas and also validating the areas. There are so many elements to be considered in this stage, and Dr. Roberta, she's here somewhere, and she has more information on that. But we need to consider all the elements involved. Thinking about the perspective of legal safety as the property and the domain of the areas that claim for the demand of exclusion and the process of communication with the programs, validating them, which means having a flow of information. And we'll have to develop that. We have to have a technological base in this regulatory process of checking the requirements, the validity of information, verification of requirements, and a minimum validation, because to record the exclusion, we need to have a base of information for the territory. This is the task we have now, designing and implementing a system that will allow safety for all the agents, the ones that want to be excluded, and the other projects that would like to have a clear information on that, understanding the goal of the law. And the goal of this part of the law is to preserve the rights of all the agents involved. And some communities, they have the option of developing their own approach and effectively not having the risk or the interpretation that the right is appropriated by others. Our task will be creating a regulatory base, an informational one, that will provide safety for the procedures and for the process. CONARED is a collegiated agency. It's a space of assessment of results at a national level and allocation of national results among the federal, state governments, the federal government and the state governments to provide the transparency of what it means to payment by result and appropriation through mechanisms of market and a collegiated instance. And with this law, they will receive executive roles. It's clear now. We saw in the ministry a need of restructuring it. And lastly, we are at the moment of talking about integrity. It's a 20 years experience of carbon credit. All the agents and institutions learned during the process. The project developers, the private companies, and the state and federal agencies. We need to pay attention to the moment we are in the evolution of the mechanisms. The debate, the official debate that resulted in the 6.4, is about, do we have removal credit, or what is the technologic process? And the initiatives of integrity, VC Plus, and others under the perspective of buyers, when we talk about the companies that would like to be buyers, we need to have to be careful on that, on this perspective, because I'm using an offset that will allow me to offset an emission. I need to be transparent that I done my homework of reducing emissions on everything I could, doing everything I could in achieving scope 3 and the emissions that are outside of my operating control, and being transparent on the ones that I cannot reduce and the ones that I need to offset because of that. I'm investing on carbon credits, and also I'm investing my image, my reputation as a company, as an institution that is that wants to be carbon neutral. We need to be careful on what is actually considered a credit that will allow me to comply with this commitment of neutrality in a transparent way. So, subject to the companies, the institutions, the governments, they are subject to all that. Here in Brazil, we have expertise, experience, technical capacity to demonstrate that our credits are of high quality, and we have conditions to comply with this standard of requirements of integrity, because this is the global challenge. All the initiatives are contributing to the reduction of emissions. We need to have less emissions and more removals. And that's what we need to demonstrate.
Thank you. In this process of exclusion of areas, we get to a barrier, classical barrier here, which is the land ownership regulation. Getting to our conclusion, we're going to go over our time just a little bit. I would like to hear from Cristina. What can we wait from Minister of Finance for COP 30? I cannot wait too long for the Q&A because I have to go to the airport. We're going to produce a document that the scope of the Minister of Finance to COP 30. We're talking about 4 pillars of work: mobilization of private capital, private equity. First of all, priority for tropical funds forever, CFFF, as we are negotiating, we are developing. We're going to be now in the moment where the country are going to apport these resources, and later we're going to have 125 millions of dollars to keep those forests standing. That's what we're going to do on COP 30. Another pillar is the agenda on multilateral banks and the reform on climate funds, on climate financing, the elevation of the domestic capacitation, on how countries like Brazil has its Brazilian investment platform for ecological transformation, which is the tinder for projects that really are going to put in place this ecological transformation in conformity with modern taxonomy, um, making possible mitigation, adaptation with the last pillar is regulatory pillar, where we have two main initiatives. One is what we call super taxonomy, summarizing the harmonization, interoperability in between sovereignty taxonomies, increasing the sectoral scope of these taxonomies. We understand this developed countries focus in sectors that is not our reality, economical reality in our countries. In Brazil, Australia, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, we have sectors like agriculture, cattle farming, mining, tourism, urban planning. And we have to understand that if the country understand that we can have sustainable process for these sectors, we can choose these sectors for international investment. And interoperability is going to make this possible. Look at the thresholds on the mitigation of these industries is going to be a variable among countries. A country has a more clean, energetic metrics that have higher criteria for mitigation. We on electrical energy, we already reached our NDCs. So it doesn't matter for us if 70% or 100%. Interoperability demonstrates through a tool, a practical tool. Excel sheet could show it, how each country understand that these financial assets or these investment projects can be sustainable or not. And the last pillar is carbon market integration through regulations to make a coalition of countries which are going to look for standards, shared standards for adjust of carbon credit across borders. That's our ambition project we're going to bring to COP30, and we understand that we need to bring that to the debate. And the way that EU established this cycle without transparency for the standards of RVE is not acceptable in this environment of cooperation that we're establishing now. Coming now to Brazil, I had no more battery on my cell phone, and Europe and China had an agreement, climate agreement, to reaffirm the climate agreement, which is a great news for a COP in this world that's with lots of conflicts in geopolitical level. The way commercial barriers are being used as tools of war, and having in focus science and climate in focus. Minister of Finance wants to defend development, sustainable development, defend democracy, defend peace is what we want, is what the society should be doing now. Thank you. I'm going to open quickly for Q&A because Cristina has asked, she needs to leave. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We could spend much more time here. We have a lot to talk still. Adjustments of correspondency, or the points we could approach here with Mr. Secretary Aloísio. I'm going to open for 3 questions now. Please, Gabriel. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Cristina, Plínio, Joisa, Jolie. A very important point that we need to talk now is dialogue. We have, as Brazilian Alliance and NBS, dialogue is going to qualify, is going to make possible a great law, great framework for the implementation of these projects. My question for you is, how are you doing the planning on the technical committee, permanent technical committee, or on this legal framework? I would like to answer quickly. I hope I can answer this well. The law foresee two different instances. Technical committee consultative is a committee with private sector, state, municipalities, and civil society and academy. This is a level, and the other level is the regulatory chamber, specifically built by those who are regulated, appointed to the regulation that's SBCE. This is established in a moment that happens posterior to the scope of who is part of SBCE framework, and we're going to understand later who is going to be part of this chamber in this process for regulation. It creates a extraordinary secretary that is going to build these two CTCs, not a complete decree, but the composition of these commissions is going to be a later aspect. This is going to be a later step. In principle, we're going to establish these two committees, these instances of participation. As a technical committee, participative. We'll have to have a broader view on the formal instances for participation. We have in the Ministry of Environment a chamber for social aspects, a chamber for municipalities, a chamber for scientific decisions. We have to create this space for dialogues, and we have the formal instances, and we have, as important as the processes, the regulation process is going to be by each regulatory act, by federal law, should be preceded by steps of consultation and dialogue. Informal procedures, as we do with civil society and the scientific academy, who's going to coordinate those stakeholders to make the use of those instances for information and consent on informal committees or formal committees. We need those permeability, understanding where the politics is going and how the agents can be part of this dialogue. We're going to open a very channels for dialogue, space for dialogue to implement this in the best way possible. Another question. Good afternoon. My name is Marcel. I didn't hear people talking about the instrument that I think that's very important, that PSA and the CPR, green CPR. We have a big point that is the methodology. We don't talk about stock in the storage in the forests, because the viability of that, the carbon projects don't see that. Small landowners, they cannot be part of that. Can you comment on how do you see they could move forward on those aspects? We are in a moment that each project can demonstrate this social connection. CPR, green, or small farming, family farming can be part of this carbon credit mitigation in market. I have a small experience in that. Yes, we are in war with the planet. We have many weapons to use it against this war. We have some financial weapons, and we bring different mechanisms here. We should not confuse them. Each one has its own function. PCR, understand as we have an open consultation point now, where we are now. We just close it. We know what we had opportunity to be part of that, the regulation of this aspect. If we go back in time, go back to the essence of that, conservation and restoration is environmental services. We see carbon as the coin that does the payment. It's not so much different one thing from the other. The most important point in your question is a challenge for all, And this is more complex to bring small farmers, small landowners to that, because they're much more fragmented. It's also complicated on medium and big landowners. We have lots of examples about it. And PSA is a big possibility for that. PSI and carbon, at the end of the day, is going to go back to the same point. Where is the demand? Where is the buyer for this asset? It's going to pay for that. And that's the equation. That's the accountancy. We can create rules and see if there appear a buyer for that. And the organism for that, we have to look at the PSA. We have some strategies in the law, on the law that or PSA law. True, 2021. It didn't bring any answer for demand. Again, we are used to work a lot about the offering because of a competitive advantage, but we need to find buyers for that. You need to find other compensations. There are other pockets that can be accessed for these assets in an international level. Thank you.
Well, the perspective about being several instruments to be activated, we have the challenge of recovering environmental assets. And in fact, PSA has this feature. The law creates frameworks, and they are based on demand or source and payment state of environmental services and others. Cristina mentioned from the forest fund. I don't want to describe here the financial arrangement of the Amazon fund and others based on philanthropy, but the financial aspect could generate a flow that is stable and permanent for the forests per hectare of forests, because they should be maintained at certain levels. We are betting that this is going to create some flow. We need some domestic flows and mechanisms to have a strategic use and optimized of a potential source like this that could be used to build certain CPAs. In this menu of so many instruments we have, and in the climate plan, when the climate plan was built, in this path of decarbonization, it was a big effort related to emissions associated to the use of land. They are attached to the increase of the mechanisms that already exist. And we already have subventions for all the sectors. And our question is, which ones actually take that into account through carbon and other aspects? Because since we are using the public resources, they should be directed to the use of this that is prioritary. We have the existing mechanisms, and we need to consider the incentives that are in the regulatory plan. So many mechanisms exist, and this way we can map them out. And when we introduce a parameter like that, we already create the incentives. And the layer of incentives from the point of view of subventions of mechanisms at a tax level, then we can have the money contributions that will become revenue with the credit generation. We have a challenge of having an optimized perspective to be able to move forward in so many instruments we have to address, and the need to drive resources, clear incentives, and materials for the agents that have environmental assets and maybe they want to restore the assets. Thank you. Our time is up. I apologize to the next panelists, to the next panels. Sorry for being over the time we had for this panel, but we wanted to take advantage of this opportunity being here with Cristina and Plinio and Aloísio. We'll continue this afternoon with our program. We have a panel now that will talk about the financial mechanisms with the participation of BNDES and other banks. Another panel will talk about bioeconomy. So many great panels for you to attend, and at the end of the day, we'll have a closing happy hour. Thank you to the panelists. Let's continue with the program. Thank you.